Hi, I'm Callum from Retro Power. Since 2020 we've been doing a weekly walk around our workshop called the Uncut series, where we show the progress on the various projects we're working on. We thought it would be really cool if we edited together all the segments that relate to each individual project into one series, so you can actually follow the build of an individual project start to finish. So that's what we've done. Welcome to the Dream Car Build series. Car-wise, the Chevette, loads going on with the Chevette. We're sort of at that point where all of the forward planning that we did during the metalwork phase is just paying off, because at this point, although there's bound to be the odd complication, a lot of it is just putting stuff together. So the door builds we've pretty much done. We've got the latches in, the strikers on, the handles have been painted and fitted, the lock surrounds are painted, we've fitted all the locking mechanisms. The boot latch mechanisms are in, boot pins are in. We've actually done both because it's not actually a motorsport build, it's a road car. I thought it best to have a locking facility on the boot, so although it's got push button pins on it, we've done a latch on there as well for the key, so it can be secure. If you were then not bothered about security and wanted to just use the pins, you can take the striker off the boot latch and then it's just on the pins. Then lots of plumbing's been going on, so we've done the through the car fuel lines. They're stainless braided Teflon lines. We tend to use that for the in-car parts. I mean, in a motorsports scenario, it's pretty much mandatory for the rules that it has an overbraiding that's tough enough to withstand impacts. So that would be a mandatory requirement for motorsport. Now, it's just a sensible thing anyway, so although this isn't a competition car, we've gone with stainless overbraided Teflon line hose throughout the inside. And then we've got a different spec hose in the engine bay and in the fuel cell compartment. It's actually a company local to us called Racing Lines. It's their super light range, which is their equivalent to a Goodrich range, which I forget the model of, but essentially it's a really lightweight Kevlar braided, really flexible hose system with crimped on threaded fittings on the end. So in all the places where sort of occupant safety is less of a concern, that's what we've used there. So we've got the Bosch 044 fuel pump and the fuel filter mounted in the boot. All the fuel plumbing's ready to go to the tank. We've just got to get the tank fabricated and that will complete the fuel system. At the front, from the bulkhead to the fuel pressure regulator, and from the regulator to the rail, all of that's done in the Racing Line Superlight. We'd already done the bracketry for the regulator, so that was just a case of bolting that in. We've also done the oil plumbing, so the dry sump tank, we've painted the dry sump tank gloss black. You probably tell the gist of this car, and the reason it's called Project Vader is because we're just pretty much blacking everything out. The wheels will be black as well. So we painted the dry sump tank gloss black. All of the oil plumbing is also in the Superlight hose system. I've got the oil cooler mounted in there. All the oil lines are done. Scott's just been working on the radiator with a view to completing the coolant plumbing. So we used essentially a Group 4 Escort radiator, which we used when we were mocking up the metalwork, but we've edited the shape of the top hose connection on it, so it just leads perfectly to then a 90-degree elbow into the thermostat housing on the engine. Because that ended up quite a long pipe, we've done a little sort of gusset plate across it to support it so it doesn't fatigue and snap off. We've done some welded bosses on the bottom of the radiator which hold the oil pipe which goes from the dry sump tank to the remote filter housing before the oil then enters the engine. And there was something else we did on the radiator. Oh, the fan mounts. The standard ones all came with fan mounts on the front and we wanted them on the back, so we've cut the fan mounts off the front, put them on the back. That's now ready to be painted gloss black as well. The heater arrangement's all in, so this is running the factory heater, so all the plastics have been cleaned up, tested the fan motor, redone where there used to be some foam seals around the flapper valves that switch between demist and face vent. They've all been resealed, all that lot's in. We've been doing the screen wash plumbing, so we've got a stainless steel screen wash tank that we made in a previous episode. That's now been painted gloss black and fitted, and we've been running the screen wash hoses. Actually, at the moment, they're clipped in the standard position along the front of the heater box plastics. I'm not mad keen on how that looks, so I think we're going to reroute them to be actually inside, so under the scuttle, so you don't see that in the engine compartment. And then there's a bulkhead through the slam panel there, scuttle panel, so should I say, which will then go to a spray bar on the wipers. So again, from the metalwork stage, we planned out the plumbing there so that we would have spray bars actually on the wiper blades that have a number of jets pointing at the screen, and literally as your wiper goes up, it sprays all the way up. Just a much nicer arrangement in terms of getting screen wash all over the screen. What else is there? There's so much I feel I'm going to have forgotten some things. I think that's everything in the engine compartment. The hydraulic handbrake, it's carbon handbrake from Camillus Bradley. We bolted that in. We did do a repaint on the actual base part of that because the original paint finish was not the best. So we painted that in a tougher gloss black paint, same as everything else. Extinguisher system is in. It's got a lifeline plumbed in extinguisher. Again, we put the holes in the bulkhead and brackets on the cage tube here for the nozzles for that, and we'd already put the holes in the tunnel to mount the tank, so it was really just a case of fitting the nozzles, mounting the tank and cutting all the lines to size and fitting that. The floor plates, they're in. If you remember when we were at the metalwork phase on this, we did these cool kind of mock-up plates. So we designed the shape of the foot plates in CAD. We then worked out all the bolt positions, and then they were on the CAD drawing, and then we basically do a big slot around those positions, bolt the bosses that support the plate to the plate, put the plate in, and then the slots allow us to weld the plate with all the bosses bolted on. Then that plate, which is essentially a jig, is discarded, but the drawing is then used to make the final foot plates, because we know then from the CAD drawing it'll just bolt straight to the bosses. So Scott plasma cut the final aluminium floor plates. They've been painted. The driver's side ones had the tilt and floor mount pedal box bolted to it. Again, we've made provision for that and put structure into the shell to support that. So that's all done. The kick panel plates Scott was making, I think, in the last episode, as well as the mounts for the headlight ballasts. All of that lot was sort of finished, sanded, finished with like a brushed finish, and then sent for anodizing, and that lot came back today. And also, before we sent that anodizing, the billet part that we'd had machined for the center console effectively, so it's a surround around the gear shifter, and then in front of that is an integrated brake and clutch fluid reservoir, which is all one billet piece. That came back from machining, and so the whole lot of that went off for anodizing. That came back today. Scott, I think, is literally just finishing it. He's got it in his hand at the minute, there it is. So he's just in the process of installing that billet tank piece. And also now we've got the headlight ballast panels and the headlight mounts back from anodizing. They'll go in. We've also got the mounts for the ECUs that we made for the kick panel area, so they're ready to go in now. We've made the seat mounts as well. So we originally mocked up with some off-the-shelf seat brackets, just one set that we had lying around. We mocked them up with a motor drive seat. Now, space is really tight on these Chevettes, so we had their extra narrow width seat. And actually, once we'd done all the mountings and we had Darren from Motor Drive over here, he said, I reckon there's enough space to get the next width up in there just. So he lent us a dummy seat effectively to get in there, and he was right, it does just fit. So with that in mind, we ordered that width of seat, which arrived a few weeks back. So the one thing we had left to do was basically make the mounts for those seats. So Scott fabricated the side mounts, they've been painted. Seats are essentially ready to go in now. The only reason they're not is because we need to run the brake line down the far side of the tunnel, which is going to be impossible to get to with the seat in. And I think, take a deep breath, that's a lot of talking. I think that's everything on this car that's happened at the moment. And Jamie looks like he's about to pass out from holding the camera. Yeah, oh yes, he's telling me there's more, there's Dynamat. So that's another thing Scott's been on with. Although this is basically a competition spec car, as I've said, it's a road car in reality, and although it's never going to be a super refined car, we're just trying to get some of that horrible resonance you get in motorsport builds down. So anywhere that's going to be covered on the shell and not visible, we've put Dynamat on. So underneath the floor plates, as well as on the back of the floor plates, Scott? Yeah, and on the back side of the floor plates, Dynamated inside the quarters, inside the roof, because it is going to have a headlining. Essentially anywhere, and inside the doors as well, essentially anywhere that's going to be covered with a trim panel or headlining that's not going to be visible in the finished car, we've got some Dynamat in there just to try and kill a little bit of the vibration and resonance in the shell. The tyres arrived yesterday, so we can now, these are actually a borrowed set of wheels from the guy who owns the other Chevette we built, so we can now get the tyres fitted to our black painted wheels, and so hopefully the next time you see this, they'll be on it. The other one we're going to talk about is the Chevette. So last time there was a whole load of progress on it, lots of ducks in a row, so to speak, so we were able to make quick progress. Slightly slower progress at the minute, mainly because we're actually waiting for the wiring loom, which kind of holds up a surprising sequence of jobs. So one of the things I need to do is get the dash away to be flocked. That's going to be just flocked in a black flock finish. Those who haven't seen that flocking process done, basically the part is sprayed with an epoxy adhesive, usually dyed the colour of the flocking, so that colours the substrate the right colour, so it'll be a black dyed adhesive in this case. And then you use an electrostatic gun, which has little fine fibres of nylon in it. It almost looks like little black dust at a glance, but it's little tiny long strands of nylon. And then they're electrostatically charged, so when they're sprayed, just blown basically with air onto the dash, they all stand on end. And it's a load of little fibres standing on end on an epoxy adhesive, and that's what the flocked finish is. So we're sending that away to be done. But we're going to put some carbon fibre panels in the original aperture where the instruments used to be, and in that middle panel where I think there was a speaker. Those carbon panels are going to come out of a huge sheet of carbon fibre we've had laminated to make the door cards and rear quarter trims out of. But I don't want to make those and then find I've cut out a small piece where I needed to make a big panel from. And we end up having to have another panel made to make one of the door cards. So I want to do the door cards before those panels are made. I don't want the door cards being made before they're ready to go in, because then I've got to deal with storing them somewhere safely without them getting scratched. And the wiring harness needs to go in before those carbon panels are made. So basically we're at the point where the wiring harness has really got to go in. With that in, I can also get the wings on, because I'm waiting to do that to run the wiring down the inner wing there. I can also then make the carbon panels for the doors and quarters. We can get those in. Then with the offcuts of that, we can do the dash panels. Then once we've made those, I can get the dash away to be flocked. And actually with that lot done, most of it in terms of the interior is ready to go. The only other thing that we can do, which we'll probably be doing in the next couple of days, is running the brake plumbing inside. So the plumbing between the billet reservoir and the pedal box, which is now in, and then also the rear line, which comes via the handbrake to the back, because that needs to be bolted in before the seats go in because of access. And also, on the subject of access, with the seats not in, something we've been working on this week, or it might have been the end of last week actually, was the support for the Motec keypad. So this car's running Motec electronics. It's running a Motec engine ECU, M130. It's running a Motec 15-channel PDM. So for those who aren't familiar with that term, that's basically an electronic control unit that controls all the electrical systems on the car and essentially replaces any sort of traditional fusing and relaying. That brings a lot of advantages. It makes things very flexible. It makes wiring, it allows the wiring to be extremely neat and tidy. It's extremely reliable because there's no, you don't have all the terminals and things that are associated with a fuse box or physical fuses failing and causing you problems. And one of the other benefits is you can control that PDM with a keypad, which is operates it via a CAN signal, and essentially means that the keypad's only attached to the PDM via 2 wires. So all of the functions of the car, all the electrical functions of the car, are transmitted from the control pad to the device that sends the signals, the electrical currents to the components on the car, just via a 2-wire connection. So that again makes the wiring extremely neat. So we wanted to get our 15-button Motec keypad positioned somewhere to hand, and when we were in the metalwork stage, we decided that putting it over the handbrake master cylinder was going to be a really neat place, because it would partially hide the plumbing to the cylinder and neaten that whole area up a bit. So when we were at the metalwork stage, we put some threaded bosses in the side of the tunnel, with the plan being to then make a billet mount that came up off the sides of the tunnel and mounted the keypad on the top. So George, who you won't have seen before, he's our new guy. He's just started last week. He's basically a designer. A lot of his work is going to be CAD work, and so one of his early projects has been designing the supports for that Motec keypad. When we were happy with that, we 3D printed them. The 3D print trial's in there now. I'm really happy with all of that. So those files have now been sent away to be machined. As soon as those bits are back, they'll go in, and then with those in and the brake plumbing in, the seats can go in, and as I say, once the carbon bits are here, all of that interior can go together and everybody will be happy. So yeah, that's basically where we're at on the Chevette at the moment. So we're still waiting on the wiring loom, which I think is going to be dropped off tomorrow for the Chevette. But in lieu of that coming, there's a few jobs we've managed to tick off on it. So the fuel tank arrived. We basically drew up that tank. We'd already integrated mounts for it when we did all the metal work. And we had a sort of plan for how that was going to be. I did a rough sketch drawing, and Concept Racing did the fabrication. Fair play to them, they turned it around in unbelievable fast time. Concept, I'll have mentioned before, are the guys that we use for all our sort of precision aluminium fabrication. So typically radiators and fuel tanks we use them for. So that now needs the straps making to strap it down. We've trial fitted it in there, fits a treat. It's essentially a rectangular tank with a little notch out each side underneath. On one side that clears the tunnel that's in for the exhaust silencer, and on the other side it just comes up to clear a pressing in the original bit of floor. And then we've got essentially a dropped pot in the middle. You might call it a swirl pot, but it's basically an anti-surge tank in the fuel tank itself. So there's a round pot extending from the bottom, which is only linked through to the main tank via a few small holes. So the fuel fills that, but can't easily slosh out of that during cornering, braking, acceleration, etc. And that's where the output to the fuel pump is, and then the return feed to the pot goes straight into the pot, so the return from the fuel rail is always continuously filling that pot as well. And it basically means that any amount of hard driving, you're very, very unlikely to ever get any fuel surge issues. And also the way the return is positioned right at the side of that pot, so it basically swirls the fuel in there, which promotes getting the aeration bubbles out of the fuel. So it's a sort of uninterrupted, unaerated fuel supply. So that's ready to be strapped in, just got to make the straps for that. Scott's also put the brake bias adjustment knob in. We're running a Tilton floor mount pedal box in this, which we did all the metalwork fabrication for when we were back at that stage. We also did the bracket on the cage, integrated into the cage welded in, so that was done at the metalwork stage. So the remaining bit was basically to cut the cable to size, attach it to the balance bar on the pedal box and bolt the control knob in, which is now done. He's also bolted in the Motec engine ECU and PDM that sit in the near side kick panel. I think probably a couple of episodes ago we showed those panels being made. They went away for anodizing, came back, they're now bolted in. So that's all there ready for when the wiring loom arrives. We've also been doing some CAD design work on a couple of components. So the rear brakes, the bracketry for them came as part of the axle. It's got an Atlas fully floating Atlas. Oh, I can't get my words out. An Atlas fully floating axle in it. And the brackets for the AP calipers on the back were integrated into that axle casing. On the front, we're using normal Vauxhall Chevette uprights. So we've now drawn up caliper brackets to mount the AP 4-pot calipers we're using, and we're using AP discs on the front, which I think are 304mm off the top of my head. Now they're sort of separate bell type discs, so we've also CAD drawn up the bells for those discs. They bolt onto the back of the hubs in a similar fashion to how the originals did. We've got alloy hubs on this, which are non-standard, but the original hubs have the wheel on the front and the disc bolts to a separate bolt pattern on the back. So that design has been retained just with an alloy hub, and the bells we've drawn up bolt onto that register on the back of the hub. Then also the rear lights. So I think we mentioned before that we've done custom front lights on this, which are Hella Xenon units, which we've made bracketry for, and then designed a bezel, which is going to be machined from aluminium. We've also designed our own rear lights for it as well, which are basically a machined aluminium plinth that will be black anodised. It's got an LED lamp unit that's then sunk down inside it, and then there'll be a machined acrylic cover that basically screws onto the top in a smoked acrylic. So it'll look very stealthy. You won't really see that the lights are there. It'll all look fairly black, apart from when you actually turn those lights on and then they shine through from behind this acrylic cover. So really, they're going to be machined, I think, next week. So really looking forward to getting those here, get those anodised. That's going to be one of the finishing touches exterior-wise. And then when the wiring loom goes in, we'll be able to put the remaining wing on the front, so it kind of brings it all back together in terms of the look. And as I mentioned last time, once that wiring's in, we've then got a domino effect of jobs that we can do. So we can cut all the carbon trim panels, get those in, do the carbon panels and the dash. Dash can come out to go for flocking. We should be also getting the machine components for the Motec keypad mount back next week. They'll go for anodising along with the light surrounds, and then that can go in. And then at that point, everything can go in the interior. We can get the seats in, harnesses in, all of the billet parts inside, and we'll be really cooking on gas then. Chevette is probably the next area to mention. So we've got the support structure we made for the Motec keypad in there, which we designed. George drew that, 3D printed it, we're happy with that. Andy at Concept 303 machined the parts for that. Trial fitted it yesterday or the day before. That fits absolutely perfect. It's really solid with the aluminium as well. So those parts are now going to go away for anodising. Again, it's almost a shame. It looks so beautiful in its raw machine finish, but it doesn't really go with the theme we've gone for of everything murdered out, as they say on that car. So that's going to go for black anodising. The wiring loom, which I think we mentioned we were waiting for because there's a domino effect of jobs that holds up. Max finished the main loom. He's almost finished the engine harness as well, which will be coming over, but the main loom arrived a couple of days ago, so I've been fitting that over the last couple of days. Got it all routed where we wanted it to be. The rear leg runs down the sill and then over the inner arch tub. We'd previously welded on bosses everywhere for where it's going to be clipped and where the earth points are going, etc. So it's really just a case of laying it all out where it's got to go, routing it through all its holes and grommets, and starting to connect everything up. And that's looking really good. So with that kind of run across the front, I've also started to get the headlamps together. So if you remember, we've done a sort of custom quad headlamp by Xenon Hella conversion on it. So the mounts we made, they came back from anodising a while ago. They've been bolted on, and I've fitted the Xenon units on. The ballasts are already on underneath as well. Scott did that a couple of weeks ago. So we made some little aluminium trays that sit underneath and have like a downturned rear edge, because they sit just behind the bumper, but they're sort of exposed to the front of the wheel. So we did a splash shield integrated into the mount. They're in, so the wiring's all in for those. And again, we made provision for that while it was all bare metal. So the main power cables up to the Xenon units from the ballasts go up neatly through some holes in the inner wing, which are sort of evenly spaced as the lights, so the wires just come perfectly parallel down. John's been working on all the brake plumbing, because in order to get the interior complete, there were just a few things that need to go in before the seats for access reasons. One of those is the Motec keypad mount, and the other is the rear brake pipe. And it made sense to do all of the brake pipes inside, so we're doing hardline all on the inside. And the plan, which is sort of coming to fruition nicely now, is that we've got that billet reservoir on the tunnel top. And my vision was always to have 3 hard lines coming down out of that, perfectly parallel down the tunnel, under the foot plate, which covers the master cylinders. It's a floor mount pedal box. And then to have 1 hard line coming up parallel and kicking back towards the rear, 2 coming up and kicking forward towards the front, which will be the front circuit, which will split left and right in the engine bay, and the one to the clutch. And that's looking really good. So the final piece in the puzzle on that is Scott's just making the foot plate, the heel plate that your heels will actually rest on while you're driving. And it covers the master cylinders and the plumbing where the pipes come out of the master cylinders. So once that's made and painted, you'll really see that whole look come together with the hard lines all coming out of the side. So really looking forward to seeing that. And I think the next step on that now is to get those carbon trim panels made. We already patterned for those. And with the Motec mount anodised, the carbon trim's in and the hard line's done. Seats can go in, harnesses can go in. We're going to get the dash flocked. So yeah, it should really come together over the coming weeks. This spent most of this week and probably the very tail end of last week back in the paint booth, because we were going to do the wet sanding and polishing on the paint. Now, historically, we've always done that when the shell was finished immediately after paint. We'd do that before it came in here. With hindsight now, we've decided to leave it a little further through the assembly process because it minimises any chance of scratching, etc. And now it's very rare that we scratch anything badly enough to have to do any repaint, but when you've done a perfect polishing job, any tiny little movements of dirt and even pulling a cover over it, if it's got any dust on it, scratches the surface slightly, and it makes more sense to leave it further down the line to do the polishing, so there's less minor scratching to get out with the detailer at the end. So we had that next door. Gaz and Steve have been working on this, and the process there is basically wet sanding it with 1500 grit, then moving down to 2000 grit, keeping plenty of water on the surface just so it keeps the sandpaper clear, don't get any clogging in there, which tends to leave scoring marks in it. And then once they've done that, move on to compound on a polishing head, usually a couple of different grades, starting with a coarser one, moving on to a finer one. We use a bit of a mixture of products, but I think they're using Ferrecla stuff on this at the moment. I'll find out exactly what it was and put the detail in the description on the video. And with that done, it's back in here and we can carry on with where we left off, which was James doing the carbon trim panels. He templated these a while back. And so it's basically transferring the templates over onto the carbon sheet that we had laid up for it, cushioning them out, trial fitting them, drilling all the bolt holes, and there's inevitably a little bit of fettling of the holes to get everything to line up absolutely bang on. So we're going through that process at the minute. I think the wiring loom had already arrived last time, so that's now loosely in. I was waiting to put the remaining body panels on because the wiring actually routes behind this wing. I've got to carry on now and just start tidying up the wiring properly and starting to terminate the things that it connects to. But we're really in that full steam ahead stage on this now. The engine management loom's being dropped off next week. I'm going to get the headlining in soon because that's got to go in before the rear windows. And it should just really pick up some momentum now, I think. James has been working also on the other remaining job before the dash was flocked. You've probably noticed the disgusting brown dash that's been in it, even whilst it's been black like this. And we're making some carbon panels that actually blank off the apertures in that dash because we've got the Motec digital screen. And I didn't want to do that before flocking the dash for risk of damaging the flocking, but I also didn't want to make those carbon panels until we'd done the trim panels because we're making them from offcuts from the same piece of carbon fibre. So with all the trim panels marked out, James was then able to cut the sections to blank the dash. He's been making some brackets for those. It's a remarkably complicated job. There's nothing really to attach anything to. In fact, the instrument panel, which is one of the biggest blank pieces we're doing, was originally essentially just shoved in, and that's how it was from Vauxhall. It just basically pushes into the gap and there's a tight fit. Obviously a single thickness of carbon fibre, we can't just push it in and jam it in there, it's not really acceptable. So we've done a plasma cut bracket that bolts into the same, in fact he's put some riv nuts in the metal frame on the back of the dash, made a plasma cut bracket that bolts into those, and then there's an intermediate bracket each side which is formed and bent and bonded to the back of the carbon fibre and then in turn bolts onto that main bracket, which seems an incredible amount of work just to mount a flat piece of carbon fibre, but it's really the only way to go about it. So that's done. With those panels done, we can now get the dash flocked, and then yeah, it's all going to start falling into place. Trim panels will be in, get the dash back from flocking, that can go in, we can finish all the wiring before that goes in. The mount for the Motec pad will come back from anodising, and yeah, everything should just start to fall into place. The steering wheel, which has been on order for a month I think now as well, which still isn't here, but I think I got an update on the delivery date for that, which was about a week's time I think, so you'll have to wait and see what we've got in terms of the steering wheel, but it is just an off-the-shelf one. Yeah, and that's where we're at.